This video is about my interpretation and analysis of the film. Now I'm not going to summarize the plot of Fight Club since I assume the people who are watching this have seen the film, so instead you'll see a synopsis of it on the screen. If it wasn't obvious, this video contains spoilers for the film. You don't need to watch it if you don't want to, but obviously I'd recommend that you do. I've already come to a conclusion about what this film is trying to say. One could argue that this film is showing the decline of masculine men in today's modern society and their emasculation. Now I do see that as a possibility, a big one, but I'm going to be more general about my interpretation, and it is that Fight Club is a film about the loss of identity, consumption, and addiction of man that is slowly leading us to the destruction of society. A fair bit of warning though, I'll be quite provocative with the things said in this video and will not be censoring myself. If that disturbs or makes you uncomfortable, then I suggest that you challenge yourself. Also, throughout the video when I say Fight Club, I don't mean as the movie, but as the club or organization. One more thing to address is I'll be analyzing several lines of the film, which may seem like a lot, but trust me, it does have an end goal. This has been my semi-long introduction. Let's proceed to the first part, which is the loss of identity. There is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is, what are testicles? Well, I'm glad you asked, because according to our experts, more specifically, Google. Testicles are responsible for making sperm and are involved in producing a hormone called testosterone. It is also the second essential source for creating human life. This information is connected to Robert Polson's first line, which is, "We are still men." Throughout Fight Club, we get constant references to masculinity and castration. This is related to the idea of identity and how we embody it. Society has become more fluid with definitions and labels, specifically when it comes to gender and sex. But how come with all this fluidity, we still continue to box ourselves within these traditional roles of masculine and feminine? We've grown up with the idea that after we were born, we go to school, graduate, work, get married, and have kids. Having and being able to create children has always been the end game we all have to reach. Possibly to escape meaninglessness, to create something greater than ourselves, and to then give that greater being greater purpose, and to continue our legacy and family name. These ideas of reduction and legacy are challenged in Fight Club by using castration as a punishment for anyone who disobeys the rules. We see this happen in the bathroom scene where Tyler Durden and Project Mayhem tell the chief of police about their plans, and in the scene with the narrator in the office with the investigators. Both scenarios end up with both men not getting their testicles removed, but what if that did happen? And not just to these two men, but to their whole population? What if the sole thing we've relied on to give us meaning and purpose in this bleak existence was taken away, forcing us to find meaning and purpose ourselves? The loss of testicles is the loss of a surface-level identity. The loss of meaning is the loss of our will to live, which is a bit ironic because it is our reproductive organs that allows us to create life but not give ourselves what we desperately yearn for. Now, what exactly is it that we want? The Myth of Sisyphus is a work by Albert Camus that explores concepts of existentialism, nihilism, and absurdism. Sisyphus was a deceitful king who had tricked the god of death. When he had died, he was given a punishment in which he had to push a boulder up a hill day by day, but as soon as he reached the top, he lost energy and let go of it. The boulder rolled back down again. Sisyphus, who has to push a boulder over and over again without any idea if this or the next time will be his last, represents the narrator in us in today's society. This is the most privileged the world has ever been for most of us. We have an abundant amount of access to whatever we could possibly desire. At any given moment now I could go on Omegle, talk to strangers, and see a portion of the world. But it is within this sight that I realize how little I have actually experienced. Camus argues that it is not the universe that is absurd, but our relationship to it. That we were simply born without any inherent meaning, and it is within this lack of meaning and purpose that we embark on a path of reason, constantly trying to explain our existence using limited frameworks such as religion and science. Eventually, we question ourselves, the universe, and God himself about what our purpose is and whether living a life devoid of any meaning is worth it in the first place. But that right there is the problem. Just to clarify, being able to question oneself and analyze things critically is not the problem. It is that we think too much about the meaning of life that we then fail to actually live life. There is no objective meaning to life, and there is no objective meaning to ourselves, but that does not mean that we can no longer live. A short paragraph from Thus Spoke Zarathustra that further justifies my point is, and I quote, "What is the truth? For what at this level is truth? The truth, isn't it the discovery that no truth is discoverable except the truth which you yourself are? That there is no truth, sense meaning, in the world except the truth, sense meaning, you yourself give it." Tyler Durden reaches a similar conclusion of Fight Club, which is self-evident in his attitude towards life by living dangerously. This is my favorite scene in the movie, justifiably so. Tyler's dialogue here perfectly encapsulates the Buddhist and absurdist philosophy like, hey, relax, nothing is under control. The life is suffering, but it's what we do with the suffering that makes it meaningful. By actively avoiding pain and suffering, we actively avoid life. We think too much, but do so little. We overcomplicate simple things, assuming that those things are us, and we fill our minds about what ifs when it should be about what is. And what is important is to accept the fact that any given moment now we could die, but that's what makes living better. Nietzsche even highlights that what makes us humans great is not our will to power, but our power to will, meaning that we are great not because we have values, but because we can value. A short recap before we proceed to the next part. The loss of identity is about how we as a society refuse to admit that our existence lacks objective meaning. We then made the objective meaning be about following a predetermined life path where everyone is born, goes to school, works, gets married, has kids, and dies. The problem with this system is that it may give an outcome but not the best kind. By forcing ourselves to participate in a world where our values based on the brands we own and the status we have, we start to develop a nihilistic view on the world. We have lost individual thought and continuously participate in consumerism and meritocracy. We have become herdsmen, allowing ourselves to be confined to inanimate objects. Basically, life is meaningless and so are we. What Tyler represents in the film is someone who completely rejects these ideas of a predetermined life and argues that we must let the chips fall and live dangerously. Knowing death is embracing the life we have. Don't think, just do.
I'm not against fun. I resent the fact that the word entertainment, which meant gathering together originally, has been changed to be synonymous with mindless. Entertainment now can only be a Harold Robbins novel, can only be a film like Star Wars. It can't be reading Kafka. It can't be Shakespeare. Who says? Who says? They say, the ones who watch Starsky and Hutch. That ain't entertainment anymore.
The video clip I just showed was from an interview that featured Helen Ellison, and I want to specifically highlight his answer about entertainment because it relates to Fight Club. Of course, his statement also needs a separate discussion on should entertainment have meaning, but as of now, I simply want to reference the general information, which is that yes, most of our modern day entertainment is mindless garbage. I had my own conversation about social media and entertainment in English where our teacher showed us a picture similar to the one on the screen and asked us what it meant. The most obvious answer is that the man is addicted to the validation from social media and consequently ignores the real world. The only answer I could think of at the moment was, why? Why was he addicted and what was the cause of the rise in addiction to technology? I raised my hand and answered that maybe the real reason why he's addicted isn't because of the online validation, but because he has become desensitized and numb to the real world. We've consumed so much of our external world that we now seek more things to consume, which end up being mass-produced franchised items that are practically worthless. We now live in a fast-paced society where every second we must constantly be doing something. In Martin Heidegger's memorial address, he states that, for nowadays, we take in everything in the quickest and cheapest way, only to forget it just as quickly, instantly. Just as we can grow deaf only because we can hear, just as we can grow old only because we were young, so we can grow thought-poor or even thoughtless, only because man, at the core of his being, has the capacity to think. By allowing ourselves to be slaves to the IKEA ideal, we also allow ourselves to lose control over our mind and body. We can see a similar conversation take place between the narrator and Tyler in the diner scene. My mind is rotting and my body is numb because of being stuck in an endless cycle of consumerism. Tyler himself perpetuates this cycle by stealing fat from women who have had liposuction and using it to make and sell soap to the very same women. Trends nowadays only last for 2 to 3 weeks and then we move on to the next best thing, which is just the same thing but in a different shade. The point is that it is a thing, an object, and we have made ourselves equal to it. This line about single-serving friends connects to Marla in the washing machine scene wherein Marla takes property that other people own and sells it for her benefit, which indicates that nothing is truly ours and even when we do own property, it could just as easily be taken away from us. We think and act like the world is ours, and every single item and product that exists was made with a uniqueness that represents us as a person. I wonder whether a strawberry acai refresher with a mix of coconut milk and added with fresh berries from Starbucks, or a slightly oversized t-shirt and a soft cotton jersey with a printed Nirvana design from H&M defines me more as an individual. Each day, the actual expression of individuality stops coming from art and freedom and comes more from the material goods of others and big corporations. But what makes us so sure that we even deserve to have such things in the first place? Do we deserve to have such things because we are sentient? Because we are free men? But what is a free man and how are we one of them? We've grown up obedient and lost. Not only have we become lost in the world, but also lost in ourselves. As Tyler Durden says, It has become the purpose of all recent societies to raise and tame an individual as a civilized animal, a domestic pet. We have been told that everything is equal and that mediocrity is something to settle for, that you will own nothing and be happy is a mindset that we should all pursue. So how do we stop being civilized animals? The answer to this is reflected by these quotes: losing all hope was freedom, and it is only after we have lost everything that we are free to do anything. These two quotes from the film represent the idea that after being tamed and addicted to the consumerist and capitalist ideal, the best thing we can do is to let go. Whenever we hope for something, we allow ourselves to have unrealistic expectations about that thing. Because of those expectations, you become obsessed with it and chain yourself to it. Instead of improving and progressing, you are being tied down by the things that are supposed to make you happy. By letting go or losing hope, we free ourselves from these expectations and societal conditions. We start to live in the present and embrace the now, which allows us to reach a state of mind that can be considered as absolute freedom. There is still discussion about whether absolute freedom is even achievable. A German philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer says that a man can do what he wills but not will what he wills, meaning that we can do what we think we want to do but not know why we are doing it. Of course, this right here is a bit of a tangent, especially since I'm not the most knowledgeable about free will and determinism, but I do believe that the world is primarily built on a deterministic idea. We exist not because of the good and the bad, but because there is chaos and order, and within this chaos and order lies predictability. As stated earlier, society has made us conform to this idea that having a job and getting kids is the best solution to meaninglessness. This idea has its opposition, that instead we must fully embrace living in the now to achieve free will or to fully gain meaning. I have my problems with both ideas, mainly that we cannot eradicate hierarchy and the importance of having a stable direction in life, but we must not allow ourselves to become the last man and mindlessly obey the lifestyle that corporations promote. My problem with absolute freedom is that most of the time people who follow this are not realistic with their goals. Simply being free should not be the goal, because in what sense are we going to be free? I believe that instead of freedom being the goal, it should be about living and thinking for oneself. We will also never be fully independent or self-sufficient because we still rely on collective society to provide us with the needs we buy. We must seek balance between these two ideas of order and chaos. Again, that was a bit of a tangent and I think I contradicted myself, but feel free to point that out in the comments. And now I'll be moving on to the destruction of society. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Nietzsche's argument on God's death is not a declaration that God is not real, but instead a warning that the decline of belief in Christianity in Western civilization will lead to man not finding any sense of meaning in the world, that every good and courageous deed man has done will serve no purpose in the world that God built. Religion, by its very nature, is another institution of ideology and thought that fills multiple gaps in our minds, to which we cannot give any definitive answers to. So once the idea of God is dead, another one is born, which is nihilism. The loss of God, meaning, and identity has led us to this point in life where we have become avid consumers and nihilists. Tyler's solution to this problem was to create Project Mayhem. There are a few things to unpack about Project Mayhem. Let's start with their objective. Project Mayhem is a cult-like terrorist organization that trains itself to be an army to eradicate modern civilization, possibly to reach ground zero. To be able to join Project Mayhem, you need a few requirements, like 2 black shirts, 2 pairs of black pants, 1 pair of black boots, 2 pairs of black socks, 1 black jacket, and a $300 burial fee. Once you have everything prepared, you have to stay outside Tyler's house for 3 days without food and shelter. Once you get in, you have to follow strict rules such as: first rule, you do not ask questions about Project Mayhem. Second rule, you do not ask questions about Project Mayhem. Third rule, no excuses. Fourth rule, no lies. Fifth rule, you have to trust Mr. Durden. Unknown rule number: if anyone for any reason attempts to interfere with Project Mayhem, even if it's Tyler Durden himself, the punishment was for them to be castrated by having their testicles sliced off by force. Tyler's philosophy pre-Project Mayhem was to take control of your own life, not by having a strict routine or schedule, but by rejecting modernity and thinking for yourself. The 3-day challenge you have to go through just to get to Project Mayhem symbolizes Tyler's philosophy, which is that to be strong and separate yourself from the weak, you need to be able to sacrifice and live without your comfort. But post-Project Mayhem, Tyler begins to embody what he was initially opposed to. Project Mayhem became another collective society where no one had an identity. To destroy the corporate world that gave us mindless mass-produced franchises, Project Mayhem became another mindless mass-produced franchise, a corporation where Tyler Durden became their god. In Tyler, we trusted, and in God, we trusted. The chant they had on Project Mayhem while working reflected that by trying to abandon an institution that didn't do them any good, they end up creating another. The members of Project Mayhem had no names and all looked the same. It was only after Robert Paulson's death that it became clear that everything once again became a copy of a copy. I found it funny when they were called space monkeys because basically, they are monkeys drifting in space, not doing anything productive in the real world. What Tyler and Project Mayhem highlights as well is the expectation that is placed on a man's masculinity. The narrator represents an emasculated 21st century man. Through his emasculation, he starts to project his ego, who is Tyler Durden, a hyper-masculine version of himself. In Nietzsche's magnum opus entitled Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he talks about the three metamorphoses of the spirit, which are the camel, the lion, and the child. The camel is the narrator who's constantly carrying the weight of societal values that he did not choose. The narrator is obedient, submissive, and repressed. Each of his values was simply given to him. But what happens when he starts to reject those given values? This is where the lion and Tyler Durden come in. The lion is the destroyer of values, just like Tyler Durden, who condemns societal norms. Instead of allowing himself to follow thou shalt, he liberates himself from it. However, the biggest problem with the lion is that it can only destroy values, not create any. Nietzsche says that the child is the ideal spirit because the child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. For the game of creation, a sacred yes is needed. The spirit now wills his own will, and he who had been lost in the world now conquers his own world. I think this is what Tyler means when he says ground zero, or you're one step closer to hitting rock bottom. The point he's trying to teach the narrator is to become the child. Project Mayhem could also be another lesson for this, that I want to destroy the current model of society to implement new and authentic values. The problem, however, is that Tyler's execution of his plan was not so great. So, before I have my closing statements or my conclusion for the video, I want to address the contradictions of Tyler Durden and the symbolism of Marla, which are the next two parts of this video, by the way. Before I address the contradictions of Tyler, I'll highlight the similarities between him and Diogenes of Sinope. The paragraph I'll be referencing is from chapter 1 of The Meaning of Life by James Fezier, which I'll be linking down below. Diogenes of Sinope lived as an impoverished beggar in protest of the increasingly lavish lifestyle of his peers. As a young man, he was exiled from his hometown for defacing coins which were symbols of economic power and political authority. When someone asked him how he felt about his exile, he replied, "That was how I became a philosopher, you miserable fool." Hunting for a place to stay, he took up residence in a large barrel, which quickly became a stereotype for the cynic's lifestyle. Tyler and Diogenes' similarities comes from how they perceive and act in society. Both believe that the artificial growth that society would experience in the future is incompatible with true fulfillment, and that the best way to live life is through simplicity and detachment from material possessions. Tyler's actions, like defying social norms by peeing in soup in restaurants and living in a squalid house that resembles poverty, are just like of Diogenes, who peed and masturbated in public while also living in a large barrel. Both were nonconformists and cynics. They showed contempt for the traditional structure of society and said that we should open ourselves to a more direct connection to nature, which would allow us to be happier. Tyler's nonconformist mindset and the narrator's mindless consumption are their biggest differences, which also reflect the rest of society. I'm hesitant about calling Tyler a hypocrite, mainly because he did practice what he preached. It just so happens that there are several contradictions with Tyler, so I settled on calling him contradictory. I'm still unsure if that's the correct word, but that's what I'm going to stick with. The main contradiction or hypocrisy he has is being the same thing he criticizes. He doesn't do this intentionally, but he still embodies what society typically expects a man to be. He is assertive, independent, charismatic, confident, and sexy. Just right after he tells the narrator his thoughts on the supposed ideal male body, it immediately cuts to a scene of him fighting a person while looking the same way the Calvin Klein models looked. Tyler even comments on how it's not love, it's just a sport fucking after he has sex with Marla, which is also another stereotype of a hyper-masculine man, where sex is nothing more than just a sport. The narrator, just like a lot of men nowadays, sees Tyler as their ego, as the man they wish they could be. If only going to the gym, having a beard, and getting chicks made men, we'd see a lot more of them. But this is what Tyler's character highlights, and is that men have no purpose, and that you do not become a man by being into crypto and going to the gym. I wish I could be more in-depth about masculinity, but since I'm a woman, I don't know much about the actual male experience, so instead, I recommend people to watch this video by 𝐁𝐀𝐂𝐊𝐆𝐑𝐎𝐔, which I'll be linking down below. So it seems that the problem with masculinity is that men don't have enough access to it. They then seek alternative places like MGTOW and Red Pill, or they project this Tyler Durden version of themselves. Once they start to embody their ego, Project Mayhem becomes the result. this part of Fight Club is where we start to see Tyler Durden's true colors. Instead of helping these men become the best version of themselves, he emasculated them even more. A lot of people assume that Tyler is the Übermensch, but Tyler Durden is not the Übermensch. He's not the Übermensch because by the last moments of the film, the narrator and Tyler get into fight. And because Tyler is only the extension of the narrator realizes that he has to shoot himself to kill Tyler. The narrator shoots himself and then Tyler disappears. The reason Tyler disappears is that the narrator was able to overcome himself. Nietzsche says that the only thing greater than God is the Übermensch, also known as the Overman. Man is something that should be overcome, meaning that the objective of becoming an Übermensch is to master oneself and to move beyond being a simple byproduct of our circumstances in a world where most individuals are a result of where and when they are born. The will to power, just like the Übermensch, is not meant to represent man dominating and ruling over man, but instead it is something that conquers nihilism and allows us to go on our own journey of self-realization. The narrator moved from being the last man to being the Übermensch by no longer fearing death and not allowing his ego to take control. Marla is often overlooked as a love interest when in fact she serves a greater purpose in the film. There are theories about how Marla is also the extension of the narrator, but it is his feminine side that he projects onto Marla. This theory makes sense, but I have to disagree. I believe that Marla is his inner child or spirit animal. Let me explain. Though, just to be clear, this section will not be too in-depth or long. It's a bit of a surface-level analysis of the character. We first see Marla in the film when she shows up at the testicular cancer group that the narrator participates in. The narrator hates Marla because her existence reminds him of his lies. In a sense, it could be argued that Marla is the reality that confronts the narrator, and through his escapism, he creates Tyler. There is another scene where the narrator tries to go deeper into his cave to find a spirit animal. Once he goes deeper, he finds a penguin, and once he goes deeper again, he finds Marla. The cave symbolizes his subconscious, and the penguin symbolizes Marla, his inner child or spirit animal. Penguins symbolize dreams, adaptability, dual natures, closeness, family, and spirituality. A penguin is a bird that's adapted to flying through water instead of the sky, choosing to dive deep into the world of dreams. The dreamy, spiritual, and dual nature of the penguin gives us a clue as to how Marla is a part of the narrator's subconscious. Another factor that highlights that Marla is not real is how similar she dresses to Tyler, but Marla has more of a realistic and sane perspective on life. Also, the reason why I'm so adamant about Marla being the narrator's inner child is to tie up the three metamorphoses of the spirit. If the narrator is the camel, then Tyler is the lion and Marla is the child. The narrator shooting himself was overcoming Tyler, and the narrator holding Marla's hand was him evolving and finally reaching ground zero, or being the child. His admitting he likes Marla is him finally being able to create his own values and be the Übermensch. Sorry if my explanation was whack, but I'm sure you get my point. So, what does this all mean? As I've said, Fight Club is about the loss of identity, consumption, and addiction of man that is slowly leading us to the destruction of society. You know, while writing and researching for this video, I was thinking about other people's comments on how Fight Club is a satire. Now, if it is a satire, what is it directed at? Gould told me that it's a satirical critique of consumer capitalism, but what if it was a satirical critique of meaning? Think about it. I'm on the last few chapters of this video and I'm still thinking about what it all meant. I wish it could be more obvious. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it means that we think too much about meaning, and because we think too much, we allow ourselves to create our own suffering. Through the suffering, we try to find hope, but then we falsely assume that hope is our status, our symbol, and our things. From a young age, I want to be a person of authority that other people would follow. I want to create the rules everyone else would obey. Because of this, I ended up investing too much in believing in truth. The hard part about the truth is that it could just as easily be a lie. I thought meaning and truth was the best thing I could come up with. I was so obviously full of myself as a child. I looked down on people who did things just for the sake of doing them. To me, every action has a purpose and meaning, so if someone thought that I'm only doing this because I can do it or that I wanted to, they were stupid, unproductive, have no plans, and are most likely unreliable people. I thought this way until I dealt with depression. It was at this point in life that I not only knew but experienced suffering too. Every single day I was swamped with a big feeling of defeat and hopelessness. I was barely productive and I kept crying. I tried therapy, antidepressants, self-help, and religion again, but there was still a huge hole in my chest. I became envious of people who just lived life and didn't worry about anything at all. I started to wish that I could be like them. My purpose for my life always had to be of divine meaning. It couldn't just be so and so. But this mindset of mine made me miserable. The loud music I play in the background during work, or the podcasts and pointless YouTube reactions I keep around to avoid my thoughts and flaws just made them more obvious. I'm lonely. I'm terribly lonely, and I try to find myself in other people. Fight Club struck a chord with me because it wasn't just a fight club. It showed what I had been feeling for a long time. I saw myself both in the narrator and in Tyler Durden. Fight Club was like a mirror that reflected my subconscious. And as much as I admired Tyler, I never idolized him. If you were to ask younger Anna who she idolized, she would have said Aristotle or maybe Ayn Rand. Justifiably so, of course, but if you were to ask who I idolize now, it would be no other than the great teacher Onizuka. For those who don't know, Great Teacher Onizuka, or GTO, is a manga that was later adapted into an anime. Onizuka is a 22-year-old ex-member of Bazuzuku who becomes a teacher at a private middle school, Holy Forest Academy in Tokyo, Japan. Onizuka is perverted, impulsive, loud, reckless, uses money too much, has poor hygiene, did not excel academically, does not dress appropriately, and is disorganized. It's hard to idolize a person who has such traits, but Onizuka is admirable because he knows what he wants and he fights for it. He's brave, he cares about his students. When other people judge him, he doesn't care. Whenever he encounters problems, even if he didn't start them, he still solves each one. He holds himself and other people accountable, and most of all, he's a man of his word. When he says something, he does it. When I think about what a man is, I think about Onizuka, not Tyler Durden. He's not perfect, but a man isn't either. Onizuka simply lives life to the best of his ability. He never forces things, he just goes with the flow, and if there were to be an Ubermensch, I think it would have been Onizuka. If my father wasn't my male role model, it also would have been Onizuka. I don't think a man is what he is by what he wears or how he talks. I think a man is because of how he acts and how he thinks. A real man, as a woman, what I think a real man is someone who is true to himself, for himself. Seeking what is true is not seeking what is desirable. You spend so much time in your head that you realize that you haven't lived for almost a decade. Not everything has to be a grand, spectacular thing. I spent almost 2 months on this video, and I'm afraid that it won't be great, or that I failed at doing my job and just wasted my time. I'm afraid that maybe I made a false promise to myself regarding this channel, but most of all, I'm afraid that I'm not smart enough. When I asked what this all meant, it wasn't directed at Fight Club but at me in this video. Possibly even life if we're being dramatic. I try to control my life so much to justify the freedom I have, because if I were trapped and lacked free will, how could I be able to control my environment? I seek the truth too much, which has led me to be an extremely pessimistic person. If truth were so great, why hasn't it tried to look for me? We are so obsessed with finding the truth instead of finding ourselves, which is why so many of us are lost. I suppose that's the lesson Tyler Durden and Onizuka present, and it is that be true to yourself, and don't try to escape things. It's inevitable, so why make it worse, right? There's a high chance we won't amount to anything significant in life, but who said we had to be significant to enjoy the life we have now? The privilege of being makes a strong case. The sole fact that I exist is a good enough reason to continue. I don't know if my conclusion here made sense, or if it was just too messy to understand because I said too many words, but to end it, here are 2 quotes by Onizuka that I would like you guys to know and hear from me, because why not? We cannot go back to the past, no matter how hard we try, no matter how wonderful it was. The past is nothing but the past, and a brat who is afraid to be hurt isn't qualified to love someone. Number 1. Be pragmatic. The first piece of advice I have is to be pragmatic. There's a lot of discussion about whether people being more logical or emotional would make the world a better place, but I'd argue that pragmatism is a better solution, because people who say being logical is better usually think that just because you're logical means that you are objective, which is false. After all, logic, just like emotions, relies on the individual's internal framework of the world. I used to heavily preach truth and logic, but I noticed that I neglected my own emotions, which in a sense made me less objective. So nowadays I seek balance between the two and have pragmatism as my main value. What I like about pragmatism is our ability to deal with reality and not be too delusional. It makes achieving goals, having visions and ideals much easier, and I am more at peace with myself. Number 2. Learn skills that require you to interact with people and/or reality. So I'm an extrovert, not because I like people, because they're kind of annoying. so am I. I just focus more on the external world and I'm more proactive, and I noticed that a lot of people have become socially inept and incapable of doing basic household chores, which is disappointing. So what I like to keep in mind is to have skills in communication and invest in some sports or crafty hobbies. I'll be going more in depth about this in a video about self-help and small talk, but for now I heavily advocate for being more out there in the community. Now you don't have to go on full-on extrovert, just learn some social skills and have some sort of specialization which you can master. Number 3. Try spirituality and or Buddhism. Being born and raised in the Philippines made me a religious Catholic. Then I became an atheist feminist. After a few brief moments in life, I got depressed and went through mental anguish, and kept rejecting inner peace. With this, I stumbled upon Buddhism and I fell in love. I used to reject Buddhism and spirituality because it seemed so hippie and unprofessional, but I was extremely wrong. I had a conversation with a person a while back and they said that Buddhism isn't much of a religion, but more of a way of life, which is true, and that's why I like it. It helped me so much with inner peace and being more calm than any self-help person, so to any atheist, agnostics, or even believers, try Buddhism out. Number 4. Have stances, beliefs, and goals. People who lack any sort of belief system are the easiest to manipulate and probably die. See, there's this Nietzsche quote which is, "He who has a why can endure anyhow." It's important to develop a value system since most of the time this becomes our reason for living. I also noticed that a lot of people feel lost because they have no goals or a place to put their faith in, so I encourage people to find and create values and stances for themselves because this will serve as their guide through life. Number 5. Live. It's a very simple concept, yet many people fail to do this. I used to be someone who never lived in the present. The only time I did when it was necessary to achieve a goal of mine, and this became my downfall. I kept overthinking situations and rarely tried new things, but I overcome this by saying, fuck it, let's just get this over with. And whenever I get panic attacks, I always think of Tyler Durden and tell myself, you have to know, not fear. Number 6. The future is not scary. This is a bit of a 50-50 for me since I care a lot about my future and I'm generally optimistic about it, but I do get doubts where I question if everything I'm doing right now will be worth it in the end. Russia invading Ukraine and just generally the pandemic these past 2 to 3 years has been making me anxious, and I'm extremely young so I've barely lived and it is scary. But since my point is how it's not scary, let me tell you why it isn't. The big reason why I think people are scared of the future is that it is out of our control, and it is, but I approach this with the mindset of, if there is one thing we can't control, it is the present, and if we want to have a grasp on the future, we need to be able to control and have a grasp on the now. This is not personal advice, it is just what has worked for me, and I assume it'll work on you too if you give it a shot. I hope that this was helpful. Let's get into the channel notes and updates. I felt like the last 3 chapters of this video before the 2 conclusions were rushed, and that's because I honestly use my brain too much, which is disappointing assuming that those were my limits, but by making more videos I assume I'll be exceeding those limits and improve more, which is great. Speaking of videos, here's a fun fact. I was meant to start this channel back in September 2021, but I kept postponing and planning, so here is the start to something successful, hopefully. Expect to see a video every month or 2, haha. The reason why I'm setting the upload schedule to almost every month is that I'm a student and it's not like you guys give me money, so I have no real obligation to any of you. I simply do YouTube because hey, it's a stepping stone for my plans. Anyway, I have a YouTube video planned for the next 3 months. Expect to see a video about romance, parents, edgy jokes, morality, and education. Probably going to drop some manga or game recommendations, but nothing too spicy like hentai because I'm not a degenerate. Somewhere between those topics, expect to see a video. I'll probably also upload some random rants because I see stupid shit way too often these days, and as a woman, kidding, I love to complain. Don't hesitate to contact me through my socials and emails if you guys want to send me your thoughts, yada yada. I don't mind critiques or disagreements. If anything, I encourage them, so let's start with an impromptu. Did you guys have a hard time paying attention to my video because of the editing or my voice? I generally have always spoken fast and I have tried to slow down a bit, but if it's still hard to understand, please say so. All of my equipment, background music, references, and socials are in the description and comment section down below if you want to check them out. And to end this video, I have an order you all have to follow, and that's to Stream Madale by Lola Amor and Al James. You are welcome and have an amazing life. Loves. No, I don't actually love you. Sad.